And so we begin.
Yeah, well, why don't we go around and give our initial thoughts before we dig into it? I will say there are a couple things that I thought were extraordinary that you wouldn't see in other State of the Unions unless they were Donald Trump's. The first, of course, was just the unrelenting bigotry, the lies, the attacking of one group specifically, the Somalis, Somali Americans. That's the sort of thing that, I'm not going to talk about fascism or Nazism. You just read history and see what type of regimes will pick one or two groups and blame all of America's ills on those groups. That's one of the things that the president did. Another thing that he did was just generally talking about immigration. Again, it's un-American. It goes against what the Republican Party has always stood for. It's gone against what Ronald Reagan stood for. And this continued lie, and it is a continued lie by this Republican Party, and they know they're lying when they continue to suggest that immigrants commit crimes at a higher rate than those who were native-born Americans. And every study, one study after another study after another study shows this is a tired lie. And yet you have an entire party that seems in large part to be based upon this lie. Speaking of lies, it's not even a fact check. It's just a straight out lie because everybody knows watching, everybody knows speaking, everybody knows in the audience. They understand Donald Trump is lying when he's saying that the price of meat is going down, the price of groceries are going down. They know he's lying when he says that he inherited inflation at 9%. No, he inherited inflation at about the same rate that it's at right now. When Joe Biden left office, it's about the same as where it was there. Also, the idea that you're going to have J.D. Vance, who's going to investigate waste and fraud and abuse and corruption when his family, Donald Trump's family, has made at least $1.9 to $2 trillion personally since he came into office. And this whole idea about no stock trading, add up all the money. And by the way, I've always been against members of Congress trading stock. That's absolutely insane. But even add up right now all the money that they've made. It doesn't come close to the amount of money that Donald Trump has made himself personally, put in his own pocket over the past year. So you see that and you go, well, that's kind of interesting. And Willie, I've got to say also, the election conspiracies, he continues it. It's one thing for him to be doing it out on the campaign trail, lying day in, day out, lying day in and day out about election conspiracies. There's no way Democrats can win without this cheating. He says it all the time. He said it in Georgia all the time. You've got a Republican governor in Georgia that said, no, that's not right. You've got a Secretary of State in Georgia, Republican, says, no, that's not right. The same one that Donald Trump tried to cheat and get the 11,000 votes to win Georgia back in 2020. He keeps saying that every day, and every day Democrats are winning by 30, 40, 50, 60 percentage points in races across America. We saw it again last night while this was going on. So, yeah, there was a broadcaster that said the speech was extraordinary. Yes, it was extraordinary. It was extraordinary for many reasons. Most of them he did shit that no sane president would ever do. It was really, really crazy to be watching that in a State of the Union address.
Yeah, and it was long, too. The longest State of the Union in American history at 1 hour, 47 minutes, almost 2 hours long, broke his own record, by the way. The election lies, it's a tick that he can't get past. We heard it in the clip coming in when he said it again. This should have been my third term, he said, suggesting that somehow the 2020 election was stolen. It does strike you watching that address in the House chamber. That's the same House of Chamber where his supporters stormed and attacked and occupied on January 6, 2021. And he since has pardoned all of those people and tried to turn the page and whitewash history on that event. You mentioned the Somali attacks. He called Somalis living in Minnesota, quote, Somali pirates who have ransacked Minnesota, talking about Somalis and Somali Americans living in the state of Minnesota. Also just leaning into his weaknesses, talking about the economy, on which he is very, very unpopular right now, saying the economy is at all-time highs, as if just saying it makes it so. We know that's not true, and we're going to walk through the details of what he was fabricating in that speech last night. Also talking and celebrating about his immigration crackdown, deeply, deeply unpopular in this country right now, including among many Republicans and certainly among independents, suggesting that it had been a success. And then for me, Joe, on the question of tariffs as well, didn't have that confrontational moment with the Supreme Court justices who were sitting there on the front row. He did criticize the decision without going so far as to ripping the Supreme Court as he has in the past several days. But interesting that, as he said, I don't need Congress to do tariffs. I'll do it on my own. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, leapt to his feet in applause to support the idea that the President of the United States does not need Congress, perhaps not just on tariffs, but on anything anymore.
Yeah, Mike Johnson getting weaker by the day. It's like the final Harry Potter. He just kind of keeps shriveling up. It's getting sadder and sadder. If you listen to the words that he said, I will say it's very interesting. David French, I saw, there are a lot of people saying, oh, they're going to attack the Supreme Court. He's going to attack the members of the Supreme Court. Were there. I saw Amy Coney Barrett and looked at Amy Coney Barrett while he was speaking, and I thought, that's a woman I probably wouldn't cross.
Yeah.
she's
serious about what she does.
She's tough and she's serious about what she does, as are the other members of the Supreme Court. But it's interesting. He chose not to attack them, chose to be polite. It was very interesting a week after he said that they were owned by foreign interests.
Yeah, that was interesting. And look, these Supreme Court justices, as you indicate, they're fine. They can handle it. They can take this. And you know what demonstrates that more than anything is their actual opinions. I mean, one thing that is so important about the tariff case, I don't think has gotten enough attention, quite frankly, is that this was an opinion with 3 justices nominated by Republicans, including by Donald Trump, 3 justices nominated by Democrats. So it's not a partisan kind of issue. And it demonstrated that there's a branch of American government that will show independence. And there's a branch of American government that will retain principles when most people are just devolving to worshiping power. And I think that was a really important moment for the American people to see that this is what an actually independent branch of government looks like. And if they can do that, they can absolutely handle whatever Trump is going to throw at them there in that room. And, I'm actually glad it wasn't as intensely personal and vicious and biting as it was before. But I think they walked into that room knowing it could be.
At its most simplest level, last night was President Trump's biggest audience he will see all year. National audience, millions of people watched. And he came into last night reeling. We went through the polls in great detail yesterday about how his approval rating has slipped. Overall, it's slipped among independents. He's grown very weak in what used to be his strengths, the economy, tariffs. I can't imagine he changed a single mind last night. I can't imagine he won over a single voter last night. And that's bad for the Republicans who will be on the ballot this November, who have to defend his policies. We went through some of it already, the mild but attacks on the Supreme Court, all the same, a lot of blistering attacks at Democrats, the racist remarks, it seemed, about the Somalis in Minnesota. We also got next to nothing about Iran. He's saying, yes, they can't have nukes, but otherwise just said, we'd like to make a deal. But it was 2 or 3 minutes right at the end of a nearly 2-hour speech where the whole world is watching this armada in the Middle East, wondering what will happen next with Tehran if this next round of negotiations does not produce a deal to President Trump's liking. And I was also just struck, frankly, it's pretty boring. Yes, it had a couple nice moments of patriotism. He saluted the men's hockey team. He singled out a few Americans absolutely who deserve to be recognized for their heroism at home or abroad. But it felt like a campaign speech. It felt like more of the same, Ed Luce. Like, yes, he was loud. Yes, he, was animated. I don't know, though, Ed, that it's going to change the trajectory of his presidency one bit. Be curious, your thoughts.
Jonathan, I had a lot of favorite moments in this speech, but I strongly agree with your comment on it being boring. Not just the length, the hour, 47 minutes, but the predictability of the lies he was telling and the stunts he was putting. There were so many lies that at one point I thought, should we fact check, whether the men's hockey team really did win a gold? Because it was just sort of a flood the zone with it. amongst my favorite moments, but I don't think, this is effective campaigning, although it is campaigning, was him rolling the word affordability around in his mouth as if it's some very strange word that the Democrats have just learned and that it isn't really a serious issue at all. I imagine Susie Wiles and others were gnashing their teeth as they watched that, because this was clearly supposed to be, at least in part, a speech that set up Republicans for the midterms as serious on questions of affordability. And he didn't really do that. He told Americans that their prices are all falling, don't believe your own lying eyes, etc. He at one point said that drugs prices have dropped 100%, which would mean they're now zero. So I can't get excited about this speech, but I guess the fact that we're so used to these torrents of lies and the whoppingness of these lies, and that it's actually boring, does say something about us and about this president.
Yeah, it's interesting. I forget the character, the movie character that couldn't say, I was wrong, but it would just again, kind of tumble around in his mouth, couldn't get it out. Here, the president can't say the word affordability where it comes out. And this is what politics is. You give a 2-hour speech, a 3-hour speech, a 4-hour speech, it's going to be reduced down to a couple of seconds in campaign ads. And for Donald Trump, the ongoing problem is that most Americans say the number one problem in America is not immigrants. The number one problem in America are not all the things that he said were number one problems in America. In fact, they wildly disagree with him on election integrity and so many of these other issues. But it is affordability. And he just sort of tossed it aside, once again mocked the use of the word. So that was one problem. I got to say the bigger takeaway, though, here, and it's really unfortunate, and it's unfortunate for America. I think it's unfortunate for the president, too. He still thinks he can do this by himself. Says, I don't need Congress. He does. He does. Article 2 needs Article 1. Basically, I can do this without the courts. He needs the courts. I mean, this is a president. He's been president now for 5 years. And he still hasn't figured out that the way to build a long-lasting legacy is by working with Congress, passing legislation, putting things out there that will last, that will build upon the greatness of this country. And he just can't get there. He's still saying, despite over 2 centuries of the United States Constitution that says the exact opposite, he keeps saying, I can do this by myself. I don't need Congress. If you don't get Congress, it gets swept away the first day in the next administration. It's really unfortunate that he still believes he can do this by himself.
I think it was the Fonz that you were talking about.
Can't say the Fonz that couldn't say I was wrong.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, and I was wrong. Right.
No, I think also, there were these Democrats who chose not to come, and I can't judge it at this point because there's nothing normal about a House full of Republicans clapping for repeated lies, repeated misstatements, repeated misleading facts, and misleading attacks. Clapping for that and clapping for, in a way, it's clapping against everything that we're about. It's clapping against the Constitution. It's supporting something that is absolutely not based on what this country is about and just one person. And that's where we're at. And it's going to be an interesting few months ahead to see if Democrats can get their footing, but also to see if some Republicans ever step up and do the right thing.
Well, and we're going to talk about this later, too. You have actually the United States yesterday in a vote for supporting Ukraine, siding with communist China, siding with Saudi Arabia, siding with Hungary, siding with the worst autocratic regimes on the planet. And they chose to do that instead of supporting peace in Ukraine. So, yeah.
One of many examples.
It's one of many examples where Republicans, they think they can duck their head and survive this by pretending that all the things that Donald Trump is saying that are abhorrent to most Americans will somehow be overlooked. It's not. Yeah. They need to stand up and speak out, and hopefully that will encourage the president to start working with Democrats.
There are also a lot
We're
of other
long way
things
from
going
there.
on. And
Yep.